Numbers chapter 20. The book of Numbers chapter 20. Our text is found in the first 13 verses. That's the portion that we're going to read tonight. Then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, into the desert of Zin in the first month. And the people abode in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. And there was no water for the congregation. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and the people chode with Moses, and spake, saying, Would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord! And why have ye brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? And wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt, to bring us in unto this evil place? It is no place of seed, or of figs, or of vines, or of pomegranates, neither is there any water to drink. And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they fell upon their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared unto them, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes. And it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock, so thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And he said unto them, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, Because ye believed me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. This is the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel strove with the Lord, and he was sanctified in them. May God bless this reading of his word. When it speaks in the first verse of the first month, then from tracing the history of the camps, as we find that recorded in chapter 33, we know that this is the first month of the 40th year. So several years have passed without any historical events being recorded. During which time, many have been dying. During which time, many have been born. But those dying represent 3 generations, or they did, when all of this began, 40 years before. So this is 39 years after they were brought out of the land of Egypt. 37 and a half years since God told them, you're going to have to be in the wilderness 1 year for every day that the spies searched out the land and you believed the majority evil report. This is a new generation, or generations. The vast majority are 59 and under. There's a few of that last generation still living. Quite a few, in fact, yet, from what we find out later. But these generations respond in the same way that their fathers did 40 years before. When they have no water, they came together and they complained. And the nature of their complaining is very similar to what their fathers said. One other quick note of introduction. Moses commits this sin, a sin that is judged by God to be so serious that there must be earthly consequences for him. Forgiven, covered in the Lamb to come, but so serious that Moses will not be allowed to bring the children of Israel into the land of Canaan. Moses did not commit this sin as a young man. But on the contrary, he was only 119 years old when he committed this sin. Miriam dies in the first month of this year, Aaron in the 5th month of this year, and Moses most likely in the last month of this year. It is not just the young who have to be on their guard against serious sins. Even those who are mature, and even mature in the faith, face an enemy that is much stronger than any one of them and all of them together. And so again, we have an example in the scriptures of an aged saint committing such a serious sin that it puts us all to mind to be on our guard, no matter how old we may be. Moses smiting the rock, the setting, the sin, and the response. God, once again, in perfect wisdom, and also as a part of his love, wanting to give opportunity for the people to respond to God in a right way, sets before them the lack of water. It had happened before at at Rephidim. They had had bitter water at Marah. But now a second time, no water. And again, a test. An opportunity to exercise faith. An opportunity to cause your faith to grow. To respond to what God's brought in their life. So that they would give him glory. Instead, just like their fathers 2 generations before, this group of the people of Israel, the church of God, chode with God, we read in verse 3. That which was preparatory to their sinning so grievously, as we just sang, that God was angry with them. The Psalm 106, puts it this way: They angered him also at the waters of strife. Strife, Meribah, chode, all mean the same thing, same root word. They angered him also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes. And the Psalter number, the versification, correctly shows the tone of the psalm. It went ill with Moses for their sakes, because they provoked his spirit, so that he spake unadvisedly with his lips. Moses has responsibility. Moses has blame. But God makes it very, very clear that the murmuring children of Israel, because of the way in which they selfishly and sinfully responded to his test, bore also responsibility for Moses' sin. He did. He bears responsibility, and they, for what he did. Note that before they actually chode with the Lord and with Moses and Aaron, this is what they did. They gathered themselves together against. Do you realize that any consistory, classis, or synod will never receive a protest with multiple signatures? It'll receive multiple protests from each individual or a house. But you don't gather together and sign a petition and sign a protest. They gathered themselves together. That human temptation to make sure my complaints are understood and held by others. So they stirred themselves up. It wasn't to calm themselves down. It wasn't, well, how are we going to respond biblically? No, the result of their gathering themselves together is that they chode with Moses, and they came up against Moses and Aaron, and thus against God. So they're ridiculous, really, ridiculous statements. Would God that we had died. Why have you brought the congregation of the Lord into the wilderness so that we and all of our domesticated animals should die here? Why have you brought us up out of the land of Egypt into this evil place? There is no seed, no pomegranate, figs, vine, and no water. As if Moses did it. Wasn't it obvious that God did it? Moses and Aaron respond by going before the Lord and casting themselves on their faces before him. Previous occasions, the glory of the Lord shone and called Moses to the tabernacle. This time, Moses and Aaron themselves go. But we have to remember the way in which the Holy Spirit interprets this incident. Verse 33 of Psalm 106 says, the people, by what they did, provoked his spirit. Things had been relatively quiet as far as rebellions are concerned. his hopes, just like ours, for this new generation of Israel, that they would be different, that they had learned from the sins of their fathers what not to do. Those hopes are dashed. His spirits are provoked by the actions of Israel. God responds to Moses and Aaron. They're still holding the mantle of mediating, of being the mediator. The God-appointed mediators had to do their work, and so they did. They went before the Lord. They threw themselves on their faces, not just on their knees, on their faces before the tabernacle of the Lord. And they pleaded. That's when the glory of the Lord came, and God gave them 3 commands. Take the rod, gather the people, speak to the rock. And so verse 9, Moses took the rod as God had commanded. Took the rod from before the Lord. A rod that had represented his authority, the rod that God had had him use many times, even in the land of Egypt. Throw it down and it becomes a serpent. Take it up again and it becomes a rod. Hold it over the Red Sea and the winds will blow. A rod that he had used at Rephidim to strike the rock and brought forth water. Before we go further, remember that when Moses was commanded in Exodus 17, verse 6, to strike the rock for water, 1 Corinthians 10 tells us that that rock that they drank from and that followed them was Christ. And so when the rock was struck by the rod in the hand of Moses, Jesus was bearing the strike instead of and in the place of the people. And that strike to Jesus instead of to the people represented his death. And it was his death that brought water, the water of life, for the children of Israel. Strike the rock, Christ. When Christ bears the stripes instead of the people, then Christ by his death brings forth the water of life. That rock followed them. This time, God commanded Moses, speak to the rock. Take the rod, gather thou the assembly, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes. And then God added, and it shall bring forth is water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock, so thou shalt give the congregation and there be strength. Moses sinned very grievously. The people's sin became the occasion for Moses' sin. God was testing Moses. If God laid before the children of Israel a test and an opportunity for them to respond in faith, to respond biblically, wanting to seek, how can we love the Lord our God when we don't have water? How can we respond rightly? When God did that to the people, with the people responding the way they did, sinfully, that was an opportunity that God set before Moses, for Moses to pass the test that God laid before him and wanted him to take. And the test was, Moses, can you respond in obedience? Can you respond remembering that you are the mediator and that you will fulfill your duty and calling as my appointed mediator for the people? Having said that, let's all realize that Moses' sin is not what we often will first say. He hit the rock instead of speaking to it. That does not explain what God says to Moses in verse 12. You believed me not. That would have been, you didn't listen carefully. You were not attentive to what I said. If just the sin was just hitting the rock instead of speaking to it. When God says, you didn't believe me to sanctify me before the people, then God makes it clear that the sin of Moses was this. His spirit was provoked. He spoke. It was not what he did, but what he said. That's Psalm 106. He spoke unadvisedly with his lips. So Moses' sin was this. He knew God could bring water out of the rock. But he didn't want God to bring water out of the rock. He thought the people didn't deserve water out of the rock. And he thought they didn't deserve it, and God ought not bring water out of the rock to them because he had certain glasses on. And these glasses made him see the people incorrectly. The glasses that he wore were not the glasses of faith. They were the glasses of someone who was irritated and provoked. Who, better say it this way, who allowed himself to be provoked. Or maybe better yet, who made a choice and he consciously chose to follow his nature. So easy. So easy. But he chose to follow his nature and allowed himself to be provoked by the people. And he didn't see them anymore as God's people, but he saw them as, look at his word, verse 10, rebels. Rebels. Not the church. You've heard the example of what the church is like organically. It's like a wheat field or a corn field, but you know that while the farmer has planted wheat and corn, in all likelihood there's weeds in there. But even the presence of the weeds don't make you change the name of the field. And you say, this is my soybean field. This is my corn field. This is where my hay field. You call it that, even though you know there's more there. The glasses that Moses had on allowed deliberately, consciously, and it was his nature. He put on the glasses of no faith. And without faith, he looked at that field of the people of God and he said, you're all rebels, all of you. May you all be damned and die for lack of water. None of you deserve it. He no longer saw them as a cornfield or as a hayfield. He saw them as a weed field. A bunch of weeds. Nothing but weeds. In the previous times that God tried Moses, gave him an opportunity, tested him with those times when God said, I'll destroy this people and raise a new nation out of you. Moses kept on the glasses of faith. He very consciously said, I am going to look at them as those who are God's people. This still is a wheat field. They are sinful, they are weak, and there may be some reprobate among them, but these are the people of God. And so he laid that before God, and he responded with the glasses of faith, with faith. And he laid that before the Lord. He passed the test because he exercised his faith. But when he allowed himself to be provoked, in spite of the way Psalm 106 says it, God held Moses responsible. He could not say, if you hadn't done it, then I wouldn't have been mad. I wouldn't have lost my temper if you hadn't provoked me. Moses was not allowed to get away with that, and neither are we. We'll hear it. We can't blame others for our sins. And God wouldn't let Moses get away with it. And that was the seriousness of his sin. So that God, in verse 24, now we didn't read 24, but look at it now. They went up to Mount Hor, Moses and Aaron. This is 5 months later, and Aaron is going to die. And Aaron shall be gathered unto his people, God says to Moses and Aaron. For he shall not enter into the land which I have given unto the children of Israel, because ye rebelled against my word at the water of Meribah. You rebelled against my word. And the word rebelled is the very same word that Moses used to describe the children of Israel. You rebels. Moses' actions were just like the people he was complaining about. He spoke unadvisedly. Rashly is what that word means. Thoughtlessly. And his thoughtlessness was that he did not anymore see them the way they really are. As the flock of God. Rotten sheep. But the flock of God. That's why you didn't sanctify me before the people, God said. Moses showed that with 3 quick actions. He showed that when he took that rod and he hit the rock, not once, but twice. You want water? It ought not come. I'll show you it won't come. And he hits it twice. That's what he meant by hitting it twice. And then in his rashness, you rebels, he says, you want us, Aaron and me, to fetch you water out of the rock? He attributes to himself the ability to get water out of that rock. The third thing he did when he lost sight of who they really were was this. When he looked at the church of God in the wilderness, and he didn't see them that way anymore, then what he did is he allowed his view, his vision of them to be without God. If we can say it this way, his view was only horizontal. What was so beautiful about Moses' responses before is he always kept God in view. He had the vision of God before, behind,
next to, under that people. So that he this time doesn't see that the glory of God is at stake if the people perish. He didn't see that if all of the nation of Israel were perished in the wilderness for lack of water, that God's name and God's cause was going to be blasphemed in the world. He was just giving expression to his own frustration. He allowed himself to think that way. Because to sanctify God before the people is to declare, literally, sanctify God is to declare God's holiness. And God's holiness is that he is devoted to himself and separated from sin. And that's the way that he looked at his people. Remember this morning? How do we look at each other? God is sanctified when we look at each other and we see all kinds of sins, but we also see election and justification by God. And that declaration of God that we call justification is that he sees us as if we'd never sinned. And that's not only the way we have to look at ourselves by faith, justified by faith, though my conscience accused me that I've grossly violated all the commandments of God and kept none of them, God looks at me as if I did keep them all perfectly, because he imputes to my account the righteousness of Jesus Christ. That sanctifies God. Look at the flock, look at the field, look at the church, look at each other and say, you are the work of God. Evidence of his grace. Not because your works are so wonderful, but because God has made a declaration about you. Because you come here and you worship him and you join yourselves to the church, not saying, we're so good, I'm so good, I've done this, I've done that, but because you together say this confession, I am nothing but a rotten sinner, but God, by the wonder of his grace, has said something about me. And he's worked that in my heart so that I hold for truth what he says about me and about you. And I can't look at you any other way. That sanctifies God. That glorifies God. Because it's not what you do. Now that's not forgetting that what I see are sinners. The shepherd still sees sheep, some of the stupidest animals. Even people, when I did the funeral for my uncle and I used Psalm 23, then more than one person came up to me who takes care of sheep or did and said, the stupidest animals I've ever had. That's sheep, and you don't forget. So that when you look at each other, you don't wait for them to be good enough to get your approval. What do I bring? Filth. But he says, I love you. It's what I have done for you. It's not whatever you have done. And we know that. That's why we're Reformed and Protestant Reformed. That's what these truths teach us. Moses was not perfect. He had it a lot of times, but he didn't have it now. He didn't exercise himself in faith. And that's the way God wanted it to be. He has never made someone stand in an office, and the office is Christ, who can do it the way Christ does it. He's always going to show, I put them there
but they're just humans, and they're very weak pictures, so horribly weak. And I'm going to replace Moses with a Joshua. Now, you children know what Joshua's name is? What it means? See, Joshua is Hebrew, and the Greek is Jesus, Jesus. So God says, I'm going to replace Moses with a Jesus. He can do it. Moses can't. Every type is just that. It's a type. It's a shadow of the real thing. So it went ill with Moses, Psalm 106 says. And Aaron, you didn't mediate? Well, you will not be able to fulfill that office of mediating in the land of Canaan then. You refused to mediate. Then I will not let you mediate in the land of Canaan. He was meek, the meekest of all men, but not meek enough. Not meek as Jesus. And that's why we're here tonight. Because God did give us one who was meek enough. I am meek and lowly. And I have covered. And I've never forgotten that you are gifts to me from my God and Father. And I will suffer for you. And I will give you only good. When we hear Jesus say that to us, that is the water of life. That's real life. And that's what God gave to the people. Moses refused. He thought God should not. God says, this is why I give you water, because it's by grace, in spite of all your unworthiness, in spite of what your representative had wanted me to do. Grace is that I give reviving water to an undeserving people. So the rock that Moses hit twice bore our sins, suffered in our place. And so here we come again. Sinners. That's all. But sorry sinners. Sorry sinners are given the ears. Hardened sinners, unrepentant, those who blame everybody else for why I lost my temper, for why I am provoked, for why I'm irritated, for why I sin, they never hear. Never. They may think they're drinking, but they're not really. But those who say, just like Moses responded, and Aaron, you're right, we failed. To them, God gives this word. That's the word we need to hear. Twice a Sunday. 3 times if we could do it. That's the word we need to hear from him every hour. And that's the word he says to you. My son took your place. Here's water. Drink and live forever. Amen. Our Father, may we respond as the true Israel of thine did long ago. They were sorry. And they tasted
the refreshing water of life. Give us to taste too. Taste and see that thou art good, giving to those who don't deserve it grace upon grace, always grace. Thanks. For Jesus' sake, amen.